and welcome to this meeting of the Overdue and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, so welcome to everybody, members of the public and media who are doubtless watching, and everybody in this room. Welcome to this meeting. We're going to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. I have had apologies from absence from Councillor Jensen and from Councillor Factor. Does any member have an interest to declare? Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting on the 9th of January have been circulated. Can I sign those minutes as correct?
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to start with paper A4, which is the cyber recovery update. And we've got Callum Wilson, who's the Strategic Director of Grenfell Partnerships and Communities and Conservation. Excellent. Do you want to give a through paper?
I can do, thank you, Chancellor. So the paper just provides the latest update as of early March of where we are in terms of recovering from the cyber attack that we experienced in November 2025. It builds on the leadership team paper that we took at the start of the year, and it sets out some of the progress we've had in terms of improving our security and securing attestation and being able to turn systems back on, as well as some details about recovery more generally, highlighting the areas where we're still working through some challenges, as well as identifying some of the opportunities for the future that we're trying to work up simultaneously so that we can build back to a better place than we were before the attack.
Thank you. Open up the floor to questions. Will.
Since the strategy is going to be available by April, we must have a good idea as to what's going to be in it now. And the question is the prime objective the strategy to ensure that one council data stroke IT system with a single point of governance discipline, a single customer-friendly front door to achieve resident-first digital verified?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I wouldn't want to predetermine the exact articulation of that strategy because although it's only in April, we are working in pace, both through the recovery and through the development of that process. We've spoken to 230 different people across the organisation who are interested in sharing their views about how we can improve systems. We're really trying to utilise the data that we have about residents' experience of using some of our systems and the customer service capabilities that we're able to generate for them. I think absolutely it's very, very likely to be in a position where we are recommending an enhancement of the kind that you set out in terms of front door capability. We are wanting to think about how we can improve and consolidate the number of customer relationship managers systems that we have to give us a single view of our residents. So I think your summary is likely to be correct, but I wouldn't want to.
I think as a supplement, the reason I'm asking about a single point of governance discipline I'm not predicated how it's done. Effectively, that one agency, like the council, takes control of all the systems and makes them one point of discipline so that nobody can operate without permission to go on to whatever you have in future as as a management system?
Thank you for that clarification. I think there's two parts to that. On the one hand, I think absolutely we will need to be moving to a much tighter governance arrangement where we have IT capabilities consolidated wherever it makes sense, and we're reducing duplication and therefore ensuring that the systems we design make sense on a one council perspective. But the other side of the business is digital is at the centre of so many different parts of our council services, as we well know, following the implications of the attack. And so actually responsibility for digital first delivery, thinking about how we use our systems, actually needs to be embedded into every single officer and every single part of the council to make it work. So yes, from a governance and control perspective, but we need to make digital more central to the overarching direction of the council rather than isolating it into one area.
And presumably there could be an update in the next year, early in the next year, as to this committee.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Pretty, were you next?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Cameron. Very quickly, what I would be interested in is have we received all the revenue and the benefits that's owed to us and owed by us? Have we played, enough catch up, or do we still have a long way to go?
Thank you, Councillor. That you've highlighted the main big system that we are still experiencing some challenge with for the reasons set out in the report. So for 25 and 26 delivery, all of the bills has a benefit and bills are being issued, being actioned. The residents receive essentially from a direct debit perspective bill dates over 4 different positions, so 17th, 15th, 21st and 28th. We have the billing and collection data for the first 2 of those, and we're working through the residuals. Now, for the vast majority of people, it's really pleasing to be able to see that they've been able to make their direct debit payment in the way that we would expect. So we're in a good position from a collection perspective, but we do know there are some people for whom having a bill that covers 3 months in one go has proven difficult. And so we're working with that population to be able to provide additional support, trying to set out the additional time period people have, considering there's going to be a bit of a delay when the 26, 27 bills land. So there's a bit of extra time people have to be able to make their contributions. And we're working in partnership with some of the VCS organisations who are specialists in this space to try and do what we can to mitigate the challenge, because we've heard some of that feedback and we know it's important that we get that right.
Okay, I will have more questions in the next paper to be that Chairman is wondering, and very quickly. And what capacity and resources? I mean, how confident are we that we have capacity and resources to cope with the new generation, new system that we're hoping to implement?
So I think the work that we're doing on the strategy will help us look and consider the type of resourcing that we need, whether that's in the digital department or whether it's across the organisation. And I think broadly, when we've done with the Support Change Network and CC who are helping us, broadly the capacity, the number of people we have is broadly right. I think it might be that we need to think about those skill sets as we go forwards, depending on the types of decisions we make about levels of use of the cloud, how we manage applications, how we utilise and deploy AI. So I think there will be in that strategy some recommendations for the evolution of our capabilities.
To be a reasonable skill set with existing staff.
Yes, there will be development of some existing staff we will be needed to secure some additional capabilities.
Thank you, Claire, and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say this is a lovely, nice, short paper. So thank you for that. The trade-off with that, though, is that there are some elements of vagueness. So if I'm looking at 3.1 or 3.3, page 18, 19, 3.3, we're looking at 150 live RAG-related issues. Now, I don't know if the committee feel that they would like to know more about that, and if any of those are out of RAG. That might be something you want to take away and come back to us. I don't know if you can answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor. I can give you a bit of detail now, and it might be that I share some additional separately. So essentially, how we are managing this in that sense, it's a one council with the whole partnership, is that we have got representations from all of the different business areas highlighting where we're getting residual pain points. As the paper sets out, at one point, those pain points covered almost everything. Where we are now is most of those RAG-related issues relate to service functionality rather than service availability. So what we're talking about is the capability for finance systems to talk to other sort of CRM systems. We're talking about the capability for data management. Now, in there, that is not to diminish, some of the pain points that we're seeing. So, in November, before the attack, started to launch some of the functionality within housing repairs, being able to sort of see and book and manage those functionalities through that process. Because of the way that data is being able to be seen and transferred, that's one of the capabilities that falls through those processes. So there are absolutely some pinch points still that we're working through. Since we wrote this paper, which was about 2 weeks ago, that figure is now closer to 110. So that it is going down, and it's going down carefully and in a controlled fashion.
Thank you. I just have 2 more small questions, if I may. On the subject of the council tax billing, you'll be aware I had written with concerns that residents have. That letter has landed from Maxine explaining the situation, but it didn't really contain very much information for those residents for whom it will be a problem.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that some comms go out. I haven't seen them, and I'm not saying that means they haven't gone out, but have they? And if they haven't, when will they? And just following on from that, when you talk about 3 months, the cyber attack was on the 24th of November. So people who were paying on the 15th, 17th or 21st would only be paying 2 months. December and Jan.
Yeah.
So it is that cohort that have their direct debit on the 28th.
Yeah.
Which is the one of most concern, because that will be the biggest lump sum that might be taken. And those people in particular, but obviously the whole set of direct debits, people need to know what to do if they can't provide that amount.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the council is going to take that on the authorisation of the direct debit, that may have knock-on impacts on residents, which may cause and lead to some harms.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, of course. And it's an incredibly important issue. And right at the centre of how we're trying to manage this response is that our residents aren't made worse off or aren't punished for the reality of the council as a whole being attacked.
Or caused anxiety about the prospect.
Indeed, and so we really do understand that. And I think your letter and others has encouraged us to make sure we're providing some additional bonds, which we've agreed yesterday. So they're in the process of coming out of the organisation, and I would hope they'd be out by the end of this week.
Right.
And maybe if I just add to that, just that letter was, as you say, from me. So this is the letter to residents advising them of when the payments will be taken. There's the contact number on that letter goes direct to our council tax team. So you don't have to go through the customer service centre, and they are answering. They told us 99% of their calls. So if somebody is worried, they can ring. They get to speak direct to a council tax specialist who will be able to advise them of what their options are. The FAQs on our website also kind of cover a bit of detail. Essentially, if somebody hasn't got the money in their account, they can cancel their direct debit, and there's no issue with us, and we're not pursuing debt collection for this.
I think that's exactly the assurance that people need. And when I went to that, the QR code and the website link, it takes you to the FAQs. I didn't see anything, and I scrolled quite a long way.
Right, okay.
I didn't see anything there about council tax, and certainly nothing specific to this. So if something has been put there, then that's great.
That's it. It's all being up there.
Yeah. So, but you're absolutely right. That needs to kind of shout out to people so that so people get that message. And the other thing is that we have been able to do analysis of sort of the people people who receive partial council tax support, and because those are the people who might be concerned, and do some targeted communications with them. Anyone who's on full council tax support obviously isn't getting billed, but for other people who we know are on low incomes, so that we can provide some targeted assistance.
Thank you. Just a very quick one. Finally, it might be a yes, no, or it might be for a later agenda item, but you might know. At the cyber security councillor and officer brief them with the tabletop exercise. And also at the initial councillor training that we had in 2022. On both of those occasions, in the event of a breach, and the paper does, I think, talk about GDPR on page 20, the data breach. Both of those training pieces that the council has delivered have talked about fines. And it might be too early a stage to ask the question, is there the prospect of any fine to the council following that investigation and work with the ICO?
Shall I pick that up? So the ICO is doing an investigation. We can't know whether or not they'll find reason to fine the council, and we can't know whether, even if they did find reason, whether they would deem it in the public interest to fine us or not. Those are judgments for the ICO.
Yeah.
So
the answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah,
it's a possibility. It's not ruled out.
I think, well, I certainly can't rule it out at this point. So,
Thank you.
but I know that there's a series of considerations that they would take into account.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. The first one, just leading on from the ICO, do we know when the ICO will sort of conclude their investigation, or will know anything further about?
No, we don't. They have started an investigation, so we've responded to some questions from the ICO, but we don't know when it will conclude.
So in terms of the sort of understanding who was behind it, the public and most of the council, this is hung up in the air for fairly long time.
I mean, the other thing to say is that it's still subject to a police investigation.
Yeah.
That police investigation is still live. It hasn't been closed down.
And then coming on from the council tax stuff, prior to your letter, because this is something that came up with residents a couple of times this week, had we told residents or had any prior comms before that letter as to when? So I have people saying that they weren't aware of the kind of bulk payment they were going to have until the letter came out. And I think just generally around
Comment on that.
the comms.
The communications were before the letters went out.
Yeah, so I think we have been trying to do as much comms as we can. So there was a big letter drop to every household, and then there were targeted messages through different email channels that we had to let people know about where we were from a council tax billing perspective. I think what we always find through these processes is you can never do too much comms. There's further comms landing in the Borough. It's on the website, it's landing in people's doors this week. That also sets out even more clearly, I think, the arrangements for 26, 27, just to try and make sure that we're learning.
I think the question, Carol and Chris, was about what happened before that letter went out. What did we presumably was put something on what was left of our website?
Yeah.
Or I think so.
Yeah.
What Lucy wanted.
And then just one final question. In terms of the data that has been taken, when do we plan to talk residents about the nature of that if they have been affected?
So we've recently published an article on our website about the process that we're going through about the data breach management. So we have to go through it in a very sensitive and careful way. We're using a third-party expert company whose whole job it is to be able to manage those types of processes, to be able to help us work through the different files, be able to work out where there is personal identified information that requires notification that's important enough. And I think we'll be working through that process and hopefully beginning to be in a place where we can then prioritise and start letting people know before something.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Very good news. Planning's back online again, and we had a very lengthy discussion about that in the Environment Select Committee. But amongst all the briefings we've had, and it might be that I've missed it, I haven't heard anything about licensing. I'm just wondering where we're at with licensing, please.
So licensing isn't live as yet in terms of on Accolade. So there's a workaround that is allowing some of the work to happen, but it's pinchy and it takes a while. The Accolade for licensing for those capabilities is going well in terms of where it is in the sort of rebuild process. It's I wouldn't want to give a timeline on it, but I say it's going well and it's getting close. And we know it's one of our 3 big priority systems that we're now working through in terms of the process.
3 big priorities. What are the 3? I'm sure they're in the paper somewhere. But
so the revs and bends, the residual other parts of the environmental health and licensing, and then there's a broad
Isn't
one.
that meant resources and benefits?
Yes, sorry, resources.
The revenues and benefits. Yeah.
Revenues and
Commonly known as
Yes.
revenues and benefits.
And then the last one is a sort of broader one, which is about web forms. So we talk about customer contact and capability. There's a lot of different forms that the council uses, 150 currently, and which actually enable residents to be able to report things, to ask for things, to request for things in a much easier way than having to go through other channels. At the moment, the interfaces and the integrations of them back into our back end systems isn't working.
Yeah.
So that's the other big priority.
And I think, as a point I made in another forum, is that interface, reporting and website is something I really miss personally.
Yes.
It's very useful. Obviously, I know how complicated it is to get that particular one back online.
Yeah.
But I can't emphasise enough how much we miss it.
No, indeed, and it has a direct correlation to spikes in calls and people feeling frustrated in terms of being able to actually get the support they need. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
2 things. One is relation to comms. So we as council have had a copy of whatever comms are going out, this update. And I'm very conscious that as you talk about web forms, nobody quite knows where to go in the absence of a web form. You go onto the page and it says it's not live. So actually, if you could provide a list, also even if you put that out in comms, but actually these are things that people can use, email addresses that you can use instead. So
Okay.
streetline,
so
for environmental health. People don't really know, and also what goes under which category. So they don't know whether highways should have this or streetlights should have that. And then my more formal question. 5.2, you talk about using recent consultation performance and feedback information from residents on digital experience and priorities. You briefly mentioned it in your introduction, but I was just intrigued, how new is this and where have you got it from, and how big's your data set?
So the main 2 that we're using is some of the stats that came through the resident survey, which is coming to the leadership team next week, where we heard from 2,000 residents, proportionate sample, and where we saw some of their data in terms of some of the big areas of feedback was about sort of some of the challenges they experienced on contacting the council and some of the availability and capabilities they would want to see. So that's a sort of big driver. The other is part of the budget consultation processes that we did. We did a citizens panel event in December about digital capability and comfort using digital as a process and as a resident experience that had 100 people in the workshop.
Thank you. I'll just add my observation. I went to order some new bin bags on a form, and the email address popped up straight away on the thing telling me to email, and I emailed them, and I had them the same day or the following day. But so there is, it might be a little bit patchy, but there is some thing. I have no other questions to ask. I'm going to move to Emma.
Toby.
Toby, you may be asking what has already been asked because you.
I don't think he will be.
No.
I'm not sure.
Let him try.
Yes, I'd like to.
Okay.
If that's allowed, I'd like to take the opportunity. Thank you. So yes, it's really just so okay.
I'll
So-
come back to you.
So the reports, I understand it. The thing that does stand out to me a bit is that there's a lot of actual strategic changes to service delivery, which are in the report, whereas the report is kind of framed as like it's technical recovery. So my question really is, can we separate which elements are purely recovery from which ones are actually representing long-term strategic changes to the service delivery itself? And just with an eye on, I mean, the governance angle, for instance, but I'm always saying the cliche cloud can be someone else's computer, which is fine in and of itself, but it also raises questions about supply dependency, long-term cost control, governance, operation and control, all of that kind of stuff, which is obviously the strategic change part. And I'm just worried about it all getting folded into the recovery side. So that makes sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. So absolutely, the only section I think where we're drifting into that a little is obviously in section 5 of the report. And really that work is being crystallised through the strategy discussion that Pascal set out. So we will not be deploying a new cloud decision or AI enabled workflows under the banner of recovery without providing the appropriate scrutiny decision making process. So that while recovery and thinking about our systems and thinking about the opportunity to be able to rebuild in a different way, I think is appropriate as we're sort of assessing our capabilities and all different kinds of explorations. I think there is a very clear distinction between getting our systems back working and that future shift and that future capability. And that is what will always be subject to further conversations in these types of forums. The areas, I guess, where there is a more natural flow is where we've identified, some of the legacy tech that we're running on. So some of the reasons why the revenue benefit system is taking longer or the planning system is taking longer is because of its nature. So that as we then thinking about how we've got them back up and running or in the process of getting them back up and running, they're very clear decision points that we're going to have to make about upgrading some of that technology. That really definitely is part of recovery, because as we've got them back up and running, they're operating in a world of heightened risk that we would ideally like to diminish further through proper change.
Right.
Thank you. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a comment and a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So I'm just, I'm gone back to 2013 with the disaster, which Jackie runs only to of the Triborough, the Aggresso BT contract, which went so badly wrong for us, and we spent a long time unpicking that and who suffered for that. And at that point, so the two questions kind of relate to things that I'm concerned about, and some of them were systems that had become outdated or whatever. But the fact that the way the money comes in and the way the money goes out is different for different bits of the council. At that time, in particular, we were getting a lot of comments from teachers who weren't being paid from our state schools, and I really hope that they have been paid, because that was a massive problem there. But also the small suppliers who were at that point weren't paid, and so are those separate from the benefit payments? So that's one of my questions. And the other one also relates to the data link. Your comment, Helen, was that an article on the website. I would have no idea that it existed or how to find out. I got a letter, so I don't know if my data was leaked. I personally don't particularly mind. A lot of people would. So I don't know how that's being dealt with. So that's two things really. It's about the payments to other people who are not related to benefits.
Respond about payments and data?
And about data leak.
Yeah, so payments to small suppliers is obviously incredibly important, as to teachers, as to the other people who we owe payment duty to, carers and the like. They are being managed. The payment to those cohorts is managed through Oracle that we've stood back up. So that was a key priority of ours, and that is under control.
Sorry, was there an interruption there to start with?
So when we didn't have Oracle right at the beginning, working as we were then getting attestation, so in that period between November and the end of Christmas, we were in the process, we were stepping services back up. In those processes, we were able to make emergency payments through our treasury route, and wherever we were required to do that, we did that. And then since January, we've had Oracle back up and running in the way it needs to be able to work. On the data breach process, sorry, I didn't mean to say look at the website. I mean more. We have there's a sort of a large number of files have been copied and taken away, which we still have access to, and we're working through that process of understanding and breaking those files down to be able to work out what information is in them, essentially.
So we know whose information has been.
No, at this stage we are working through that process, and that's why we then need to be able to classify and be able to articulate for each individual person who has had a relevant data breach what has been breached about them, and that process is a very tried and tested and normal process to be able to discover, work through, triage, be able to articulate what's been lost by each individual person, and then start that process of notification. And it's
massive, isn't it?
It's a big process, yeah.
It is. Okay.
Thank you.
Again, it's a comms thing, I think. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. I don't think we have any recommendations as a committee. This was really unusually for us, very much an information paper, given the concerns that we've had about this.
Chair,
So thank you both.
can I say that I did ask whether there would be a further brief on this strategy, because it seems very urgent, should be.
Sorry, was the workload later? I'm sure that will be, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
So let's be.
Thank you very much. So now we're moving on to poster A5. So Laverne, do you want to come forward? So we have our monitoring officer, Laverne, and it describes this paper, which arose out of a discussion we had at a previous meeting, clearly articulates what the monitoring officer's duties are. But Laverne, do you want to, under the 1989 Act, Laverne, do you want to introduce it?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so as was explained, I understand that this arose as an issue at a previous meeting. So I was asked just to prepare a paper setting out what the duties of the monitoring officer are under the 1989 Act. So I explain, start with that each authority has to designate an officer as the monitoring officer. So every council will have its own monitoring officer, or in some cases, smaller authorities share monitoring officers, but in this authority, it's my role that's been designated. And although, of course, I have, various other duties relating to the legal function, there's a specific duty under Section 5A of the 1989 Act in relation to executive powers. And then there's a corresponding duty under Section 5 that relates to council side functions. So planning decisions, licensing decisions, so on the committee side, investment committee, etc. So then I set out what the duty is, and so there's two parts of it. One is about the legality of decisions, and then the second part relates to decisions as to decisions by the local government and social care ombudsman. But in cases where there's been an investigation and recommendation, and they have, and we've provided the links in the reports, there have been two fairly recent cases, so 2019 and 2024, where I've reported those ombudsman decisions to leadership team. So decisions under or reports under the first limb of Section 5A, which relates to basically the council executive taking a decision that's unlawful, so clearly unlawful, in breach of legislation or in breach, clear breach of case law. So it's not about whether something should have been done better or a project managed in a better way. It's where a decision is heading towards something that's clearly unlawful. So that's why we, our part of our procedures is that key decisions always have to have legal implications. So that's the purpose of it. So, okay, we're advising the committee, or the leadership team on the key decision taker about the relevant considerations, but it's also a check and balance. So if something's going through and a member of my team were to say, there's not the power to do this, or it's in breach of legislation, that's where the check would be referred to me. And the first step is not to report to leadership team. The first step is to try and resolve it. So are we heading down a route that we shouldn't be going, or is there a better way of doing it, or we need to get the budget in place, or whatever. So it's managed. So I've given two examples of recent cases. One in Peterborough and one in Tendring, just to give you a flavour of what a report would entail. So you know, it was really something was done without the decision making having the authority under the constitution to do it, not following the proper legal process, or not, exceeding a budget that had been approved by the executive, so completely beyond the powers. So I think the only other thing I wanted to say is, and I've drawn attention to it in 3.7 of the report, this is a personal decision as a monitoring officer. So, that's how the legislation is set out. So, technically that if someone were to disagree with that decision, it's technically subject to judicial review. But it's a personal judgment.
Thank you. I think that's very clear. I have to find this paper really interesting, and the examples were very helpful. And yeah, it was interesting that we have had a couple of breaches recently under Little Romans 2 and nothing under Little Romans 1, which I suppose is good news. We haven't had any under those. But I'm opening it to the floor. Claire, this came here at your request. So have you got any questions or?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Jen. So first of all, thank you very much for this. And as Marion said, I think it's a really useful paper. I'd like to suggest that this or some form of it be included in briefings for new councillors for the next municipal year, because it's really, I think, important thing to.
And I think quite wide, if I can take that idea and run with it a bit, the idea of, we've got various designated officers throughout the council. You're one, Laverne, and then we have a section 151 officer, and then we have someone designated for adult safeguarding.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be quite useful to have a roundup. And maybe I'm sure Jackie's thought of that already.
Designated officer.
A roundup of what they are and how important that is really and what their duties are. Sacred duties, but anyway, that was just a minor interruption. But
Thank you. So this paper isn't exactly something that I requested. At the December meeting of this committee, I asked a question concerning a particular item that had come to the committee as an agenda item. And that question was, and I've been back and reviewed the YouTube of the meeting. So my question was, does this meet the threshold for a Section 5 report under the Local Government and Housing Act 1989? This is a value for money review, examination of grants and commissioning frameworks, consideration of conflicts of interest and influence. And the reason why I'm asking this is because of the history of Maxilla Bays from 2016 to now, some of which has been documented in The Guardian, as you might know, but has been characterised by, to be generous, a lack of transparency. I think some very dubious things occurred in the journey from then to now, and the council needs to be able to demonstrate compliance. So specifically, one of the concerns that was raised was that the paper designated a council-paid CIC to be the proxy of community representation in decision making going forward, and that was the thing that had raised concern. So this paper does not speak to that question. In the meeting, the chair did say a number of times, can I ask officer to come back to the committee after this meeting in written form to address this question, and I think that still needs to happen. I don't know if that question has found its way to you or if you've been able to yet take a view on it.
So I can look at it, but I'd go back to the point that it's looking at whether there is illegality and unlawfulness in any of the decisions that were taken for the Maxilla project. And I'd go back to the point that it's not about whether there's disagreement about the way this project was managed or elements of it. It's about
that's not the concern. That's not the concern. It's about the legality under the council's statutory duties in terms of how it engages with its residents, in terms of how it manages conflicts of interest and so forth. So there are a number of concerns arising from council's stated intentions in that paper, which do pertain to potential unlawfulness. And that's why assumed that the officer, the relevant officer, might have referred it to you for assurance, because I think the committee has it's reasonable to be asking for some assurance that we are compliant. And if we can have that, I think that would move things along.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, but I just reiterate it's about compliance with the law.
Yes, that's
So
what
that's what I'm looking at.
and that's what
So-
we're asking.
And there would have been decisions taken on the Maxilla project. So those key decisions that went through would have had legal implications. I would have been satisfied that they were lawful decisions. So what's happened? So we need to point to, I don't, it's not a good use of the time to look at the whole resources, but what is the illegality? And perhaps we can go back and look at the
So
minutes.
perhaps, Claire, the
Obviously,
best
that-
start is for you to perhaps email Laverne pinpointing the illegality that you have, I feel you have
Yes.
observed, and then take it from there.
Yeah, and happy, and that is my role to do that, and I'm happy to do that.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, I did notice you said the first step is to try and resolve a concern.
Yes.
I certainly, I mean, watching back that meeting from December, I think a member of the public would be kind of appalled about A, what was in the paper, and B, the way that the concerns raised were responded to at that time. So as a minority councillor, it's really, I think, important so for public facing of this council to ensure that concerns raised are properly acknowledged, handled, addressed and resolved.
And I think that's partly what we're doing tonight. And so I think if you start that dialogue with Laverne.
Yeah. And
Yes,
speaking-
I'm still waiting for the officer response, because Chair, you did ask him twice to provide a written response that he's got assurance. So perhaps we could work together with the officer on
Yes,
that.
we need, yeah, if that's the question, that's a question for me about the legality. And just to say, I often, get letters from members of the public concerned about decisions, and I will respond and explain why I don't think it's a, Section 5A issue. So, or I do, or we need to deal with something. So,
But at this
that's
point-
part of my role.
Yeah, but at this point, it hasn't been referred to you, so you haven't taken a view.
But you do need to. I
No, it hasn't been referred to you, so you wouldn't have looked at it.
No, but I'm not looking at the whole. I'm not reviewing the whole
I'm
project.
not asking you to. I'm not asking you to. This was a specific issue that was raised in a paper about plans for community engagement. And the chair was quite clear in the recommendations, so.
I think we found a way forward.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure we will hear more about it.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. And thank you, Laverne.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Unless anybody else has any more questions? Oh, no, it's fine.
My first, okay, thank you. Thank you for the report. So slightly sort of different approach to it. So we're understanding that the report really is about a very, very high legal threshold. Now that hasn't been met, fine. And because it sort of functions as essentially a sort of emergency brake, if the possibility of illegal activities by the council. But the problem is that what also has is that it's not really clarifies the legal threshold, but it doesn't really address the government's concern that led to the issue being raised. I think more generally, the
I think
issue.
you can blame me for that, Toby, because I asked for this specific paper, which I thought had been.
Well, that's fine, but it's still raising a question which I do think is important. And if I can't ask it here, then there isn't anywhere else to ask it, frankly. And the real question is how, if there are governance concerns below the Section 5A threshold, how are they recorded and escalated? Because how this tends to function in my, limited compared to most people's here experience, is the more important an issue becomes, the more risky it is for the council, and it ends up going to the executive. And it means that it's actually more opaque for us as members to interrogate it. So the question really is, if it doesn't meet that threshold, is there a formal system for tracking these concerns, or is it sort of handled informally? What process is there? Because at the moment, it's sort of what's happened is it's just kind of being absorbed. The issue is being absorbed because it's not hitting this threshold.
Laverne, would you like to reflect on that?
Yeah, so we do, I mean, we do, the aim is to have transparent reports that cover the relevant considerations. So, you know, whether it be finance, legal implications, equalities implications, etc., going to leadership team or key decisions, which are all, you know, unless there's a Part B section with exempt information that we need to keep in private session, they're open for everyone to read or consider. And I think that here you look at the forward plan and you can decide which decisions that you want to have a closer look at. So concerns can be raised through that forum, or I mean, we spend a lot of time with governance, legal, chief executive's office planning the decisions and making sure that they follow the correct process. If you have, you know, if there's any particular concerns that you have, it's appropriate, I think, to raise it through this forum as well, because you have that overview and you look at the board plan and can see trends, or, you know, raise them with officers.
Okay, so thank you. So what I'm hearing is that there's not a formal process if there is an issue like this, because obviously this is specifically about generated by the Maxilla issue. We do have a way forward, but that's sort of an informal one. I mean, Claire is going to bring that up with you later, and it's going to extend. But there's no actual formal process. I'm just saying it's not hitting this very high legal threshold, which by its nature designed to be a very high threshold. And you know, I understand the reasons for that.
Well, the key decision process is key to this. I think Laverne is saying.
But I think the council makes decisions outside of the key decision process as well, because there's a threshold for that. And unless we're saying that it's not possible for anything to be illegal if it isn't a key decision, which I would be surprised at, then I think we need to be willing to look at concerns where they are raised. And that's what I would hope. I mean, I brought the paper from last time, and I'm seeing nothing here about any legal considerations, nothing here about equalities impact, about having collapsing community representation into one council paid organisation, which I think on the face of it, it looks appalling. It's very bad optics, but actually I will come to you with the legal points and we can look at them that way.
Yeah, and to go back to the point about that is the formal process. I'm the monitoring officer. If you have concerns, you raise them with me. Yeah, and that's, maybe we can explain it, but that's what the Constitution provides. That's what the law provides.
And we'll
that's
make
why-
sure it's better
And
explained.
that's why this group is so useful and should be publicised and shared. Thank you.
And the role and the direct line to Laverne for concerns. Good, thank you, Laverne. Emma.
Yes, very quickly, I want to back up what Councillors Benton and Simmons have been saying here. Obviously, this is in my patch, and I should have been responsible for this ongoing project. It has been a mess, there's no doubt about that. Whether it's just been a mess for outside reasons, or whether there have been some very poor decisions or illegal decisions made, is the issue.
A lot of
I'm
wasted.
hugely concerned about who is supposedly in charge of that. You know, we were board councillors, and Councillor Baxter feels exactly the same. We were kept well out of any decision making. When we finally met the officers, because we had heard elsewhere that there were decisions about to be made, we were literally, it wasn't any kind of consultation, it was a briefing. Where they say, okay, well, these are the 3 briefings, we're going to spend nothing at all, we're going to spend a ridiculous amount, or it's this one, which is obviously the preferred one. That's not how to engage with councillors. That's one way to make people really distrust the process, which we do because we were kept out. So whether or not that's still it, they may say, oh, we're going to keep in contact with everything from now on. That's absolutely great. But for the past 7 years, when that project has been, you know, morphing and whatever, we have been kept well out of it. And really, it's just not good enough. It's really not good enough not to engage ward councillors with that. And we can't ask about things that we don't know are happening. And we were literally kept out of it. And, you know, this was, it's been very interesting to
And then there's the
CIC,
question,
actually.
And then there's that question when councillors do request information, and this should have been in the minutes of the December meeting. When councillors request information, they are rebuffed, and you made a recommendation on that point, I think, Mary. either redundant or misled. And we can all remember Councillor Blakeman at the Grenfell inquiry shocking the barrister, because for her it was normal for minority councillors to be misled by officers.
Exactly.
And the barrister considered that to be a very serious allegation. And yet, after 4 years in my role, I find that Judith was right, it is the norm. And it's really concerning failure of governance. And if there is no recourse, and we're told that the bar is too high, that this is allowed, this is normal for Kensington, then that's troubling, and it should trouble us all.
I
It
don't
really
think
should.
we can accept that it's a routine misinformation or.
In North Kennington, sorry.
For North
Council
Kensington
rights.
minority councillors, Chair, it is.
I don't think we
20
accept that,
years.
but what we are.
It's not a question of accepting or not, it's a fact.
I'm not going to enter into argy-bargy about this. I think the point is that you are going to phrase it with the appropriate person who is in this instance Laverne, and we'll take it from there. But in the absence of any other questions, Laverne, finally you can escape. Thank you. And we're going to move on to the next paper, which is the auditory revenue and capital monitoring. Lucy and to Maxine. Anything you want to draw our attention to in the monitoring report before we start on questions?
Not particularly, this is the third monitoring report.
Three or four?
And so this reports the position.
Give that, that's it.
At the end of December, as we all know, quite a lot has changed since sort of the end of December. So the overall forecast position remains break even, which is in line with the position forecast of Q1 and Q2. That is comprised of a number of quite significant offsetting variances, which you can see, which
we'll be asking you about as you can imagine.
And so yeah, happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thank you very much. Who'd like to start? And then Joanna.
Thanks very much indeed. Obviously, good that you're in balance at 4-3 at the moment. What concerns me slightly, of course, you're missing some information because of the cyber attack. And to what extent are you concerned that we might be subject to some surprises, either nasty surprises or indeed pleasant surprises when you've got full access to the data?
Yeah, that is a significant concern. I think it's drawn as an exec summary, it's also drawn out quite a lot of the service answered. The approach we've taken with the data that we had available at the time of writing this report, and we do believe that the point it is subject to change, is that we have tried to estimate the impact, it's the indirect impact, if you like, so where services might lose income or where they might have, incurred additional costs. And we tried to lay that out in the forecasting department as well as in the narrative. But as we mentioned in the exec summary, sort of quite high up in the first few points, we haven't captured yet in this forecast position the sort of direct costs where we've made decisions, i.e. to bring in specialists to support in that immediate response phase and people that we've engaged in these early stages of our recovery. That is going to be a significant expense. So you heard quite a lot of detail from Callum about the work that's already happened and the fact that there's going to be a lot more work required into the future. That will need to be funded by reserves, but it's an extraordinary unavoidable cost. And we'll provide a full update on that as part of the outturn report. In finance, we are tracking all of these different costs, so whether they come included in our forecast or whether they sit outside of those direct costs. And so we are assembling that information as we go through. It's quite a rapid moving situation. It certainly was at the time that we wrote this report. In terms of our confidence in the figures in those service departments, I think it's laid out particularly in some areas where access to data was still quite constrained at the wrote this report. It is subject to change, and we might have less confidence than we'd ordinarily have at this stage in the financial year. But across services and finance, people have put in extraordinary effort and pull together the data that was available and kind of come up with sensible projections where it was available in the formats we might have it.
Thank you. And do you expect to have enough information in the normal timeframe to produce an accurate 44 report?
Yeah, and I think we're all, in the sort of rundown of the year end, we're all approaching close down and thinking, okay, what information is going to be available? So in the background, again, lots of payments have been going out through kind of emergency processes, and we can have access to our systems, but we know what those payments are. So that's, allows us to feed into this forecast. And now our corporate finance colleagues are busy trying to get all this information into the right places where it ought to be. So we've got that further assurance, but obviously we need quite a lot of this information already as things are going through. But it will allow our auditors to have more assurance as well that they can see those transactions that we've based that on. But I think, obviously one of the things that Callum spoke about quite a lot, and that's a number of questions on, are things like big income and sort of areas like council tax and business rates, where we might see far fewer transactions by the end of the financial year than we would ordinarily expect to see. And so at that point, there will be a lot more work, I think, for finance colleagues with our service colleagues to sort of estimate what we think that short-term, medium-term, long-term impact might be. So, for example, if we haven't collected all the income that we might expect to, we will approve that income as if it had been received, but then we will have to spend quite a lot of time thinking about how much of it we will actually recover. And obviously, Callum and Co are putting in lots of effort now to get the system back up and running. The direct debits have been so again to try and collect as much of the outstanding as we can by the end of March. But we'll have to make some estimates and perhaps make some provisions that we can, call down into revenue if we aren't able to collect all income, or if other costs materialise, but they are just accounting adjustments. So we're not saying, okay, it's got to 31st of March, we haven't received this income. We're saying, okay, got to 31st March, this is what we've received, this is what we should have received. We'll continue those efforts to recover that money.
Thanks very much. We've had mine anyway. So.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Joanna.
Yeah, slightly taken my question in that response. Well, no, I actually wanted to, it was about the GLA precept and the business rates for GLA, in terms of, are they still due to the GLA, even though we haven't actually collected them in, and we will need to have to borrow to fund those?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
I will have to come back to you on that. Okay, I'll ask you a slightly easier one.
2 points only this time.
There you go, yes. Question of the percentage of savings that haven't been achieved as a direct result of the cyber attack. Now, we know that usually every year there's about 80% that we achieve in terms of the threshold. I'm assuming the percentage is going to be higher this year. So to what extent are we underachieving by virtue of the cyber attack as well as the usual suspect?
Yeah, I think a big understanding question. I think our percentage unachieved has moved slightly adversely compared to Q2 tuition, and some of that is due to the impact of cyber. Don't have the sort of figure in front of me. It is sort of drawn out through the report, but probably sort of go through. So you'll see, for example, in resources there was a saving around council tax discounts and a sort of reviewing those exemptions and discounts. And obviously that works all who lost access to that database of who's paying what in terms of council tax. And so we've spoken about some of the savings that have been further delayed or impacted throughout the report, along with other income streams where, in terms of council tax, we're actually doing quite well, sort of higher collection rates, meaning that we weren't pursuing as many debts through the courts. There was an impact on income from court fees, and then that's grown quite quickly over the last quarter. But we think that is as a result of not being able to pursue any debt, because obviously we're not able to set payments.
Thank you. Pretty.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to extend further the same question. So we have no scope of actually allowing or being slightly prudent on saying that this is the potential of poor debt recovery, because I think on page 93, I think there's a figure of roughly 12 million. It says at the end of January, 14% of the council tax is still to be collected. It equates to 12 million. And you might not be able to collect all of that, because as Callum has explained before, that quarterly payments will be fine with monthly. There's a poor debt recovery. So how do we not be prudent even that we're not all just depending upon the drawdown on reserves?
At the time we wrote this report, we did not yet have the ability to collect direct debits for council tax and business rates. Obviously, in the last sort of few weeks since we've had this report, things have changed, which Callum updated on earlier. Those direct debit letters have been reissued, but obviously there are also some residents who might struggle to pay those, bulk payments, and we spoke about that earlier. So in terms of direct debit payments, while the bills have been reissued in order to theoretically collect the balance of those by the end of March, we might see some areas where we don't collect all that income. And then those residents who don't pay by direct debit, that's everything like the Fed show. When we get to the end of the financial year, we'll be able to give an update on the amount that remained uncollected. And at that point, that's the work that we would need to do to make a provision for expected credit losses or doubtful debts where we haven't received this income, and then we need to do an assessment that will then be externally audited of what we think the risk is that they will remain uncollected longer term. So that provisioning then moved to the balance sheet, so we don't, write the debts off. But what we do is we make a compensating adjustment in the revenue account. So if we thought £1 million might not be collected, we would put that £1 million to one side. It would be an expense essentially to us. And then as we made efforts to recover those funds, if that income did come in, we could then reverse that. It's a question of timing across.
So we accrued interest on the, the revenue, the income that we don't get. Exactly.
I don't think we would charge income.
No, we wouldn't charge it, but I mean, that would be another loss.
Potentially, yes, we wouldn't have those cash balances.
Yes.
But actually, there's quite a lot in the Treasury section about the kind of, it's been a bit of a swings and roundabouts and bear with the effect like huge conversations with the Treasury manager. So, of course, whilst we've not been able to collect income, that would kind of we weren't always able to pay it now.
So maybe it's Treasury neutral, interest neutral.
Just
Correct.
Thank you,
No,
Mary.
Sorry, can I just, Claire's next. Can I come back to you?
I
thought we
last time.
I thought we were going around the table.
No,
Yeah, Mary goes, who puts their hand up first?
I am. I'm the man who's going around the table about 3 meetings ago, Will, and I hope that.
We earlier on in this meeting. We
And Karen caught my eye a while ago. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to ask, and I appreciate you may not be able to answer this, but you may be able to give us an idea. On 1.7, where we talk about page 30, we're talking about direct response costs of the cyber incident. Now, obviously, this is a ongoing live rolling total. But I wondered at this point in time, can you give us any sort of ballpark understanding of how large or not large there might be? Are we talking 6 figures? 7?
Shall I? So I can't give you an exact figure.
Yeah.
Or not an exact figure. I can't give you a figure at the moment. But what I can tell you is what it kind of breaks down into. So, the costs at the moment are of the kind of additional labour and expertise required to recover. So having to pay the incident recovery cyber specialists who came in, some of the specialist work that's going on with Change Network at the moment, and also things like clearing backlogs. You've got choices to make about how quickly you can do that. It does depend a bit on staff time. So it's both the expertise and then the kind of staff, the staff time and effort to put into how quickly you can recover. In addition to that, there will be decisions to make about moving to new systems and enhancing, or have already done significant enhancement of our cyber security. And those things will be an ongoing cost around digital services, new licenses and that sort of thing. And those will need to be subject, as Callum was saying earlier, to normal decision making and scrutiny by committees and by our engagement across the council. So I do think though that in the future we'll be able to give you a breakdown of the costs, and it will be largely drawn down from reserves, or will be a request to reserves. But obviously we will encompass as much as we possibly can in the budget, and were there to be any leftover money at the end of the year, then that is exactly where we would draw that from. But I think it's too soon to say, and I think some of the pressures that we already know about, like on things like temporary accommodation, when we were having to use more hotels after the cyber attack because of difficulty with payments, some of those things we do know are going to be putting pressure on, because that's kind of like an indirect cost of the cyber attack.
That's really helpful, actually. Thank you very much. And I have just got one more quick one, if I may. It's about on page 66, the revenue recovery revenue forecast. And in particular, looking at 23.7 at the curve legacy reserve. So in the table 11, I can see there's a number 8. And at 23.7, it actually is 1.3 million and including interest, 1.432. And I'm wondering where in all these figures that we have is that 1.432? And how does it relate to that 8 on page 66?
So the grandfather recovery budget is in table 11 is our in-year revenue budgets. This is what we're going to spend this year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what the 8 refers to, but I imagine it's sort of
Probably interest.
well, I mean, it's small admin expenses. The interest will be drawn from the treasury budgets and set aside in the reserve at the end of last year. So the treasury forecast, which we just referred to, doesn't include any treasury interest generated on the grandfather balances because we know they'll be moved into reserve at the end of the year. So the current legacy balance is in the appendix around general fund reserves and also should be in section 2. So there is a current legacy reserve that's on page 89, and you can see the 1.3 moved in there, and then the forecast balance of 1.4.
Yes, I see it. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Because I know that the curve legacy has come to my committee, I think, in the past. Just from a sort of scrutiny perspective, I wanted to just let everybody know the curve legacy is about to launch the community trust on the 24th of March, and we are all invited.
If you can run elegantly,
You can have it
very
received email. It's at Maxilla Social Club, 6 to 8 p.m. on the 24th of March.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I know Will was very keen to ask a question.
No, I was just querying about the method of adopting that I've learned. The question I wanted to ask has to do with, I understand that there are short-term ramifications of what we know and what we don't know. And they may be, I suppose, in some ways dealt with as almost a sort of cash flow or delayment or delayed payment or receipt. And therefore they can be sort of tracked in a fairly mechanical way. Longer term effects may include things that we don't get in, but I was wondering whether there are any early lessons yet from the impact of cyber on this Q3 report, as to whether there will be any longer term effects in terms of the change of direction that the council intends to take. Because it strikes me that some of the assumptions have been made of our ability to change and our ability to function being questioned by the cyber attack. And the cyber attack has taken certain nodes out of the system and certain facts out of the system, and we're trying to get things back on stream. But as Callum was saying earlier on, we're having to do that with the existing legacy systems, which are then doubly affected. So the risk factor in there is considerable, which adds to the uncertainty one must changing to a new system. And as we were talking about earlier on, ones that could have just council governance overall stream. So the question I'm asking is as to whether there are beginnings, and maybe we don't know much more about this until we see the Q4 in Europe. And that then leads to questions as to whether there's going to be the effect on budget making, risk provision, reserves, and such like with regard to next year's budget, but also the speculation with regard to the forward planning about medium-term financial strategy. So, are there any things beginning to come out of this early knowledge that are going to affect the way we're going to address the relationship and alignment of quarterly reports, budget making, and medium-term financial strategy? So, because I know they're very different reports, but the question is, how do we keep them aligned? And are there any lessons to be learned in terms of alignment coming out of this early stage analysis? So I don't think we know the beginnings of where we are yet, and it probably is an unfair question until we know Q4 results at least.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, this report is talking about what we know at Q3. By the end of the year, we will be reporting on what we have spent in Q4. It's a backward-looking report because it's about 25-26 financial year. So the next update on the ATFS and everything to the future budget plans, I'm sure will actually include much more detail on, the new target operating model the council is going to adopt And the fact that, the way that we structure our budgets and the activities that we've done might be quite different. But I think there's not much I can probably imagine with that huge piece of work, as part of this.
Any other comments? Toby?
Thank you, Chair. Two questions related. And one sort of intensifies the other, but really, okay, so as I understand the report, and I'm a little bit worried, we can't blame everything on the cyber attack. We still have very significant pressures which are structural and not going anywhere, right? And that's why we have an overspend in children's services. That's why we have housing and TA overspend. And ignoring the cyber attack, or at least parking it for now. But that's, as I understand it, that's always a caveat. I'm making what I can of it. The environment neighbourhoods underspend. And so really it's an underspend and strong parking income. So basically drivers are paying for some of it, right? And of course that raises the question, if long-term service pressures are being balanced partly by drivers of variable one-off mechanisms, reserves, and not resolving the actual pressures, how sustainable is that model? I imagine demand will continue to grow, and income from parking might change, and I suppose I'm slightly thinking, you get told off all the time for making mention of the budget stabilisation reserves and things of that nature. So that really is the first question: how sustainable is that model? What are we doing to,
Do you want to do your second question?
If you don't mind me saying at the same time, yeah. So that's the voluntary redundancy program, which is mentioned in the paper that you do, I think. That's over 100 staff exits or making savings, and that's another obviously one of the variables. It's not going anywhere, but of course, long term, that has tremendous operational implications and financial ones that come with it. So it also says the redundancy costs are expected to be absorbed within the service budget where possible. So how are services expected to absorb transition costs and reduce staffing capacity at the same time?
Lucy, would you like to comment on those two questions?
Okay, so on the parking income, I agree that again there has been an overachievement of the parking income in that service. At the point at which we set the budget, obviously estimate what we think parking income is going to be. So often we might increase the budget if we, offered up a sort of additional saving as a result of introducing a new service, or we know that there's going to be greater demand. And then separately to that, as a sort of below the line adjustment, we'll inflate the income budget because we're going to increase the charges to cover our increased costs. But it's a demand-led service, and there are millions of transactions, and we don't know how many people are going to want to pay and display for 2 hours, or how many people are going to want to buy a residence permit. I think in this year, we've seen a sort of particularly big overachievement because at the time we set the 25-26 budget, there was still a consultation away with London councils about whether we should increase the PCN charge rate. It hadn't been uplifted for a significant number of years, for about 10 years, maybe even a bit more. And so we'd sort of lost that connection with it being an effective deterrent. If you think about a day's parking costing less than a PCN, people might just risk it, and if they get caught, well, it's that percent the price. So we were still waiting for the output of that consultation, so we couldn't bake that into the budget. We didn't know what it was going to be. So obviously now we've got into the 25-26 year, PCN charge rates have increased quite significantly, but we haven't particularly seen an impact on customer behaviour. So we're still issuing the same number of PCNs, and we're just generating more. So for 26-27, we're reflecting that in the budget adjustment. We're matching that to what we expect income levels to be, although they are very volatile and they're always subject to change of partners or transactions. So whilst they do happen to, in that table, sort of effectively offset some of our other pressures, we want to sort of provide assurance that they absolutely aren't doing in reality, if you like. So it's really strongly controlled by legislation, and we can only retain parking income in our annual accounts if we have eligible spend that's at the same value. And you'll see in last year's accounts we moved about 300,000 or 400,000 to the car park reserve, because in that calculation we'd receipted X and we'd spent Y, and therefore we need the difference. There are lots of different aspects of the council's budget, including some staffing costs that do meet that legislative threshold to be funded from parking income. that things like temporary accommodation and so on, but, you know, don't. It's just that they just happen that, you know, this financially it's offset one another.
If I could maybe just, sorry, Lucy, I was just going to add about the pressures, because it was more of a kind of services question, is as Lucy's describing very well, our job is to set the budget in the context that we know. And so that's why this year you'll see in the budget setting that went through the full council at the end of February, you'll see significant increases in the budget for temporary accommodation and for children's social care, because we know those costs. We can see it in other councils as well. It's not just us, it's actually our temporary accommodation numbers have come down, but the costs have still gone up. So we have budgeted to allow for that. But in year at the moment, as Lucy's describing, you know, we have benefited from additional income, which has helped to offset some of the pressures.
If you're not going to, I just wanted to hone in on part of the second question I was asking,
Which is about redundancy.
about redundancy scheme, exactly. Because there are actually two aspects to that. One is, you know, how we expected to, how those costs meant to be absorbed within the service budget and reducing staff capacity and all that, which I did say. But the other thing is actually more from my point of view, especially as a all council has a lot of casework, but well, there's nothing about what services are actually losing posts, i.e. which departments are losing staff, and especially where that sort of frontline or back office or whatever, right? And what the actual operational implications are. So, you know, for instance, we're losing all of our, you know,
I think it might be worth Maxine rehearsing the process that we went through, which didn't allow for people who were needed to be take redundant.
Absolutely, I'm sure it will be worth me just saying. So the council's got 2,697 staff. Well, I think probably got now 2,597 staff. So so just I say that just to give you an idea of the proportion that it is. So of course it is significant, but it is still a relatively small percentage of staff. So in the budget proposals, obviously we have to consult on the whole budget, and where a service change that is going to have an impact on residents is entailed by a budget proposal, then we have to consult within the budget report and on those service changes. So our criteria when we were doing the voluntary redundancy programme was that the proposal had to include proposals, you know, from both the service and the managers about how that work could be done in either in a different way or absorbed, so that that there wouldn't be an impact on resident services. So obviously that's something we need to keep an eye on. But anything where there was, like, also, you know, where there was a structural change, because there are also some redundancies that are not through the voluntary redundancy programme, which are entailed by restructuring, and those, you know, are separate line items in the budget.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, sorry, go on then, you asked.
It was only that Maxine's mentioned the temporary accommodation a number of times, and I wanted to know if there was any news on the pension fund purchase.
Not at this point. I think that there will be upcoming, but nothing to report at this.
I just wanted to prosaically turn to the actual paper and the actual current outturn position, and note concerns on page 57 about the overspend in resources and facility, which seems to me to be really quite significant, and also spread over a number of activities within that. I mean, nearly 1.1 million overspend. It's a combination of various things. Would you like to talk us through why this budget was quite so wrong, perhaps, in its predictions of what was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of things going on in the resources, as you mentioned, and actually quite a lot of them, if you thought in more detail in sections 31 and one of the appendix. It's around delayed savings. So I think, you know, we've set the budget with anticipating that savings will be delivered from first of April, you know, from where the date would be required to deliver to budget, and some of them have been delayed. And so one of the most significant ones is in the ED&T, and of course that's now, you know, whole different issue altogether. But they're projecting quite a chunky overspend, and that is partly delays in the restructure that was expected to deliver savings. So those savings should be delivered from 26 to 27. It's just a bit delayed in the financial year in which they're expected when we see a pressure. In the year again, we've got a couple of unachieved savings or savings that have been delayed, and some of those have been impacted by cyber, such as one of the council tax plans, which I mentioned earlier. I know that earlier administrative committee might have been called to one or last year's outturn, can't quite recall, and we did commit to bringing a more detailed report on the savings that is part of this year's outturn report, which we'll do for Q4, and in that we will be able to unpack one things like being delayed, where they've been impacted by cyber or whether it's other events. There's quite a lot of narrative in there, but I'm not sure I can add much more than what's in there altogether. But
okay. I think it just is a concern because we kind of get saved by parking, but what really bothers me is underneath the structure of our budgets and how accurately we're budgeting, and as well as the kind of, we've got all these
this is why I mentioned the alignment between the 3-year planning, the 1-year planning, and the actuals that come into the quarters, because it's why I asked the question as to whether out of this paper we're actually beginning to get lessons that we should be learning with regard to the longer term planning and budgeting.
So I think in the fourth quarter outturn report, we'll get more reflection on that. And just to, we just should always be improving our budgeting process and being informed by what happened last year. So I just had to bring attention to that. But in the absence of any other questions or any questions from the floor, thank you very much. We will turn to examining our own. Agenda item 7 is the forward plan of key decisions. And I no longer call through it, but everybody lets me know. I think we thought that the adult social care strategy and the future of St Mark's Day Centre ought to be circulated to the committee. We have no other forum in which to discuss it, but we'll have that one circulated.
So that's going to leadership team next week. So I can circulate it, which we do for comments from Mary. That's take to the leadership team.
Yeah, I will be going. So I'm making any comments. Any other papers that anybody had to circle for themselves and wanted to raise? Okay. Okay, so in which case we will move forward to the work programme vote, which includes some thoughts on induction, doesn't it?
Yeah. Section 5.
Section 185. And just to know, we've got one carry forward working group if the new committee wants to adopt it, which is the zero-based budgeting. So we'll be recommending to the new committee that they do that, not necessarily on that. They might choose another service or something, but just the concept of doing that is probably a good one. But has anyone got any other comments or suggestions or thoughts on the induction process? That we've added designated officers to the thing. Great, and then we'll.
I guess the first meeting in June, probably we'll have the quarter 4 forecast out to that one, and that's probably, I would suggest, keep it to one substantive paper because the work programme is going to be a big discussion, particularly with the new councillors. No doubt there'll be some new ones on this committee, and that's enough probably.
Yes, discussing the outturn and what the work programme is going to be. Yeah, good suggestion. Will and then John.
A very simple proposition that I can make was that my analysis and experiences is that we have 8 OSC meetings, understand, and 5 SC meetings. And the recommendation is for us not to have more than 3 papers at any one. So there are only a certain number of slots, and if you take a select committee, that means that there are basically 15 slots in a year. If you then actually ask, which is my question I was going to ask, is that could officers prepare a very simple chart as to those slots, those 15 slots that are filled during the year, My suggestion would be that one of those meetings, probably around December, although that might change a bit, is going to be taken up entirely by budgetary work. So all 3 papers of that would be taken up by that. You then add in the statutory papers, and I know we're allowed to call them updates and so on, but I think the ones that come around regularly, like on safeguard, statutory safeguarding, stuff to the area where I've been doing some show car insurance. If you fill those in as well, you've probably only got about 4 or 5 papers slots left in the year. And therefore, I think before presenting the first meeting with all the new councillors, with the sort of sweet shop approach of being able to have a long list and think far and wide about what you might want to do with scrutiny. And then we go to a short list over the sort of early summer period. But reality check would be that there has to be some focus on a realistic number of papers and maybe the number.
Actually, do you want to comment on that?
It'd be a very simple chart to prepare, because and I think
we've already
I'd agree that I would prepare that chart, and I will do that. Yes.
And maybe other committees would like it as well, because, for example, in your committee,
We did run.
Yeah.
I mean, I did it.
Yeah.
Well, I did it too, but I'm not suggesting it for financial services. I'm making a proposal. Can I make it clear? It's for all committees, including OSC.
I'll work with my team, speaking chairs, and we will.
So if you think you had a command coming, but I was wondering if you wanted to file the village commanders to come at any stage.
We've done that in the past, so we can either have them both at the same meeting or separately. It might be good to have them at the same meeting, because then you've got a theme and we can promote that to residents, who I'm sure will be. Last year we had a lot of residents when the borough commander came to ask questions, so we can. So I will go
That's
away.
worth the new committee money, I think.
It's
When
worth
we have it, is it
running,
June
but
or-
usually you have it sort of June, July,
So we'd have
it's
to
an
ask
annual
them now, right?
scrutiny. So
I just wonder, everyone's got so many questions to the borough commander
mhm.
that I just wonder if,
Yeah, that's
It's
fine.
not-
Aggregated distraction, is it, and do it separately?
We could do it separately.
I think it's a good,
I think it's a good idea.
Good idea to have, I didn't realise we could call aggregated
Yeah.
commander and waste that would be
yeah, it's
interesting.
probably not something we'd want to do every year,
No.
but we might want to do it
Yeah.
once every 4 years or 3 years or something. So, yep. Any other comments on the work programme? Or shall I draw the?
Obviously, cyber and
Yeah.
commission.
Yeah. You've got standing items, the budget, transformation, cyber. You'll probably want to take the resident action plan, which is in the leadership team papers, complaints, the annual complaints report. So I will plot the things that you usually do, and then you will see how much capacity you have as a committee to take the extra items, which is what Will's saying. So
There's
Agreed.
another area of effects, more than one committee, is we'll talk about getting the borough commander in, who should know what happens in his area. Is there anybody in the NHS who can be brought in to actually explain what's happening in the NHS?
well, Lucy regularly
Have
does
done
that.
that.
She has the
Very
ICBs, didn't
passionate.
she?
Anyway,
I'll let you talk about it. So Lucy's very good, very good to that.
I enjoyed the last one, it was riveting.
Yeah, I've just written a very feisty answer to the new interim CEO.
So yes, adult social care and health, definitely, at your last meeting, we had that, didn't we?
It did also affect amateur services.
But what I'll do is I will think better how I can support the committees in communicating what's going on. So something came up about the budget monitoring. I'll work out a way to better communicate to the select committees the monitoring you do here. For example, on Q4, I might set up a newsletter or something like that. And then with what you're saying, what Lucy's done with having the ICB in, I'll look at putting information out more regularly to scrutiny councillors about what's
Perhaps
going on.
alerting other
Yes.
interested scrutineers about what's going on.
Great.
Good. Okay, well, if that's it, it only remains for me to thank Jackie and Lisa for and
Yeah.
this last meeting for an amazing job. Jackie for all of us across the thing, and to thank all of you for all the effort you've put into scrutiny this year, and particular subcommittees. Preeti, thank you for the project working group and everybody else for the sort of specialist roles they've taken on and pursued. So thank you very much. And in the absence of any other urgent business.
One
I'll
final.
give
Thank you, Crouch.
No, please go for that.
Thank you,
Could we thank Mary for chairing this meeting?
No, yeah, it was over. It was over.
This meeting, I think, is all of them.
Sorry. This meeting.
Okay, Jean.